So good evening, everyone. And I want to start by saying a real good thank you to you all joining us on this, should I say, colder evening of February. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to our Spirituality and the Climate Crisis event, which is part of the Climate and Me series. I know this is the one event that draws everything to a close. So it's quite a nice event, and I'm sure you've all been on a journey. My name is Rajesh Brohit, and I'm part of the Hindu Climate Action team. And we are joined with Climate Action Leicester and Leicestershire for today's event, hence why I've been given the opportunity to host, and it's a pleasurable opportunity to host amongst all you speakers. So Climate Action Leicester and Leicestershire work together for a greener, safer, healthier community and world. And we hope that our work is what inspires you to go green and get involved with different projects across the board. So, as I'm sure you're all aware of the ongoing climate emergency, which is the defining challenge of the current times at the moment, leading to many erratic weather patterns, changes in sea level, the risk of flooding, mass extinction. And as we know, it affects the most poorly and vulnerable societies across the board. So there's many concerns, and according to the UN, over 80% of the world's population hold spiritual values, and these drive their behaviours and actions, hence why we've all come here today. So today we're looking to connect them spiritual practices and the way we approach climate change. So the basis of all this conversation will be based on spiritual values and what we hold as spiritual values and our approach to climate change. I'll start off by introducing all the speakers, and then we'll lead into a fuller discussion. I don't want this to be me talking, certainly want it to all be you talking. And then hopefully we'll move into a Q&A before drawing to a close sharply at 8:30 p.m. I mean that, I'll try my best. So today we have Amna Patel from the Leicester Muslim Community Development work, and she's a community development worker alongside an intervention worker as well. We also have Dr. Hardik Singh from EcoSeek, who works within cancer diagnosis and also enjoys his time volunteering on a number of diverse projects, being it astronomy, martial arts, and a number of different other areas as well. We also have Rachel Ben from Leicester's Jewish community and a climate and animal rights activist. We also have Davina Johan who is a youth coordinator from Hindu Climate Action and a volunteer at Climate Action Leicester and Leicestershire. We also have the pleasure of Erica and Anthony Lee Smith, a father and daughter from the Leicester Christians. Anthony is a vicar of St. Denis Church in Evington, and Erica is a member of the Bishop's Youth Council, Climate Strike Leicester, and Leicester Environment Youth Board. We also have Edith Husk, who's lay member of the Order of Interbeing in the tradition of the Vietnamese Zen master. So we've got an array of people, and truly sums up a true interfaith event here. Now, that was a mouthful for me, totally honest. And I'm glad that bit's over. So now I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Amna. So Amna, if you can unmute, and the first question area we're going to go into is 2 or 3 philosophical principles in your tradition which would lead people to care and act on climate change. So Amna, if I can hand the mic over to you.
Hi everyone, peace be upon you all. So today I brought up 2 principles from which we take from the Quran and from the Prophet Muhammad's teachings. First one being the principle of not harming others or returning harm to others, which obviously directly impacts our climate. And from this very easy principle of not causing harm or returning harm to others come many teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with very simple teachings like not causing harm to one's neighbour, not throwing rubbish on the street, encouragement to removing harmful things from the road like thorns, not to pollute water, not to cut down trees from which people benefit. So the basic principle of not causing harm or returning harm to others is central to Islam. And then on top of that principle of not causing harm, we also have to be very active to cause or to provide benefit to others. So it's not as simple as just not causing harm. We also, as Muslims, have to bring benefit towards others. And there's a famous tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in which he says that the best of people are those who bring the most benefit to people. And so there's a very famous verse of the Quran which mentions the responsibility that were placed upon humans, meaning responsibility to care and to fulfill the rights of all creatures. So this responsibility was first offered to the mountains, the skies, and to the earth, but they refused that because the burden was too heavy. So this responsibility then fell upon humans. And of course, it is a great responsibility. It requires respect, it requires justice, it requires mercy. And of course, the Quran is full of verses which warn about causing mischief, about corruption on the earth, to not be like Satan, who's wasteful, not to be excessive, not to trample upon the rights of others. And so the essence of this second principle of custodianship or stewardship is basically to fulfill every right, fulfill every creature's right, no matter how small and no matter how big. So in a nutshell, number one, not to cause harm, and number two, to be active and to fulfill every creature's right.
Thank you very much, Amna. That was certainly insightful in the short space of time that you had to get that across. So thank you. I'd now like to move on to Dr. Hardip Singh. So I again hand over the mic to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to outline three principles of the Sikh universal tradition. One is Daya, which is compassion. The second is Sarbat Pala, which means wellness and the prosperity of all creation. And the third example is the example of the seventh Guru, Guru Har Rai Ji, who was the environmentalist par excellence. Daya is compassion, and for me, Daya means suffering together. Understanding one's suffering is a suffering, it's a mutual suffering. Suffering outside of me is suffering inside of me. But at the same time, we can also heal together as well. It's a fundamental human talent that we forget as we get older, because our intelligence, our wisdom is clouded by the illusion of this transitory world. So we have to rekindle compassion by going back to our respective faith traditions and to go back to their pristine meaning and their pristine practice, all of us. The manifestation of compassion is service, which we call seva. Seva is unconditional, what's called nishkam seva. In other words, there's no expectation of reward. And seva can take many, many forms. It can be done with your mind, your body, or with material resources to uplift those that are around us. This includes the environment. And all of you, I'm sure, have been engaged in a variety of seva projects to save the environment, cleaning the rivers, planting trees, creating gardens, going green, recycling, reusing. These are all examples of serving Mother Nature. The third example is the example of Guru Har Rai Ji, the seventh Guru. He was an incredible personality. He created thousands of gardens in the Punjab where he was preaching. He planted thousands of trees. He also grew medicinal plants to then dispense in his dispensary to cure the mental and physical diseases of the congregation at the time. And also created many veterinary clinics to heal sick animals. He had the habit of walking around with his hand hitching up his long shirt that he used to wear. And this stemmed from an event in his childhood when he was walking past a flower and his shirt that was flapping around knocked the flower off the stem. And he became very upset by this. And his father, who was the sixth Guru, said to his son, Guru Har Rai Ji, be careful from now on. Every flower is as precious as everything of all creation, is as precious as any human being, as any animal. So regard the whole of creation with utmost respect and reverence. So for the whole of his life, for over 37 years of his life, he walked around with his shirt slightly hitched up so that he wouldn't knock any flowers as he walked through his gardens and through the countryside. So these are the 3 principles I just wanted to outline for you to contemplate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hardip Singh. Really appreciate your wonderful insights into the spiritual aspect of how we can connect and be one with the climate. So I'd like to move on to Rachel Ben now, please. So again, I have the mic, and go ahead, Rachel Ben.
Okay. So the 3 principles, the 3 principles in Judaism that I think outline the climate change and the duty we all have to act against it are firstly Tikkun Olam, which is one of the most important principles. It means repairing the world. And so basically acting against anything that harms nature, that harms humans, that harms non-humans. The second one is Bal Tashit, which means to not be wasteful. So to me, that would mean not wasting unnecessary packaging, so being 0 waste or as near to 0 waste as we can be, and not wasting others' lives when it also affects the planet. And the third principle is the principle of Emet V'Tzedek, which means truth and justice. So we can't have true justice if we don't know the truth, if the truth is not exposed as to how we can get climate justice. So yeah, those are the 3 main principles of Judaism that are about climate change for me.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Again, really, really appreciate your insights. And one thing I'm going to say just so far, thank you to all the speakers for just sticking to their time. It saves me the pressure of hurrying you on. So it's always a good thing. I would like to go to Davina Johan next, please. So Davina, whenever you're ready.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rajesh. So the first principle within Hinduism is what we call dharma, or our duty. So Hindus believe in an ancient concept called Rita, and Rita derives from the root of Ritu, which means kind of cycles and order. So when we think about this concept of Rita, it's all about cosmic order, how the world works. For example, how is it that the sun rises and sets each day? That's due to our cosmic order. And when we think about it, this doesn't happen by chance. You know, there's a cosmic order that underpins everything in life. And really, we have to think about everything being interconnected and dependent on one another for our welfare. And this idea of welfare is known as Sanatan Dharma in Hinduism. So I'm just going to read a quote from the Mahabharata, which is one of our famous scriptures. So, causing no harm to any living being, or at least as little harm as possible, is the way of life that represents the highest expression of Dharma. So I think it's really interesting here to emphasize the all living beings aspect, the idea that our family must extend to more than just our immediate family, but actually to the environment, to the animals, to all living beings. So as Hindus, we want to cause the least harm in the world. And if we practice these values, we naturally become environmentally friendly, and therefore we are upholding our dharma. Our second principle is karuna, which means compassion. And again, it's kind of a very important principle because when we think about compassion, we think about a spiritual awakening. We think about compassion to others, compassion to ourselves, but also compassion to the environment. So another really important principle. And the third one is satya, which means truth. And similar actually to just how Rachel had a point within her religion about kind of truth. We think about virtue, we think about truth in one's thought, in one's speech, in one's actions, and we have to think how truthful are we being to our dharma, to our duty, when we are seeing terrible things that's happening with the environment, and we're not upholding our natural moral compass. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Davina. And I can already see a common trend, and I'm so tempted to just dive in and give my summary, but I will give that at the end. But again, amazing and uplifting, and I'm learning through this journey myself, so it's fantastic. I want to now move on to myth, please.
Thank you. So I'd just like to start by saying I'm not at all an expert on Christian ethics, but this is just personally what I feel like reasons that have as part of my faith that have shaped what I do within climate activism that I wanted to outline this evening. So the first is something that some of the other speakers have also picked up on, and the idea of creation care is something that's a mandate in scripture. So I believe that creation is a gift from God that's entrusted to our care. And also that idea of interconnectedness is really important. The author Dave Bookless talks about the importance of a three-way Christian relationship with God, with others, and with the world. And as Christians, we have an inherent duty of care to protect this gift, the world, and to get angry about the natural destruction that's currently taking place on both a local and a global level. For me, the other reason that's really important is that following Jesus means we should be seeking justice for the most vulnerable communities who are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. In Luke 4, it says that Jesus is anointed by God to proclaim good news to the poor and proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind and to set the oppressed free. And I think this is a really important verse as a firm believer that the church should be openly pro the idea of climate justice. The fact is that the climate emergency is already a reality facing many parts of the world, especially in the global south. And even when it does impact us here in the West, it will still unequally affect the most vulnerable groups in our society. And Jesus's brand was all centered around supporting these poor and marginalized groups in society. And I think that this attitude is a perfect model for Christians in how we should approach caring for those impacted the most and how this systemic issue should be considered unacceptable. Equally, if we're called to follow Jesus' example, we shouldn't be afraid to challenge those impositions of influence or leadership. Like when he turned over tables in the temple, it was clear that Jesus was a pretty big fan of radical change. Many of us in the climate movement feel quite overwhelmed by all of this and by things like climate grief. But for me, it's useful as a Christian to return to the ideas of faith, hope, and love, showcased brilliantly, especially considering everything with the pandemic, in a verse from the New Testament. We don't yet see things clearly. We're squinty in a fog, peering through a mist, but it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, love extravagantly, and the best of the three is love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith. I was going to move on to the next speaker already. Thank you so much, Erica. That was truly uplifting, and certainly think you just shifted the mood in terms of a very, very uplifting speech. So thank you. I now want to move on, last but certainly not the least, Edith, if you would like to step up to the podium.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for inviting me. I would like to outline two areas in this first section of the talk. The Buddha, when he offered his teachings to us, he did this with one end in sight, and that was to bring us out of suffering. And he did this by making clear to us an outline of an eightfold path. And the start of the eightfold path is right view. Now, I follow the tradition, as has been said, of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. He is known as a peace activist and an environmentalist. Engaged Buddhism is where he's coming from. And he coined a word, which he would like in the dictionary, but it's not there yet, to help us understand this concept of right view. And it's called interbeing. So he uses the word interbeing. And what do we mean by interbeing? So I'm going to read to you what he offers us to understand interbeing. Interbeing is the awareness that all human beings and all phenomena are intricately connected to each other at the deepest level and are interdependent. We cannot exist by ourselves alone. We are not separate from all other phenomena. We inter-are with all animals, plants, and minerals. And if we do harm to them, we harm ourselves. Likewise, if we look after them, we look after ourselves. And so with this kind of deep understanding of who and what we are, we learn to be mindful of all beings and of the earth itself. And our mindfulness is a word that has crept in. It's much used. Some people think it's overused. It seems to be everywhere these days. You can go into a newsagent and you can buy a mindful coloring book if you're so inclined. And this really points to probably more to concentration, which is an aspect of mindfulness. Right mindfulness, as the Buddha described it, alongside right view, always contains a loving, compassionate element. Another possible translation of mindfulness is actually loving awareness. So when we bring mindfulness to our understanding of interbeing, we look after all that is. We practice being truly present, and from a deep, open-hearted and clear space, we do our best to look after everything. Bowing deeply.
Thank you so much, Edith. I think you pretty much summarised all our discussion there, which was very lovely. And now it's over to me to do the tough job and try and summarise all what you said, which I'm never going to do justice to, but I'm certainly going to try and attempt. I broke it down into 3 areas, and them 3 areas are truth, which I think was prevalent within all your conversations. The idea of truth being the foundation of what we try and achieve, because truth then elevates all the rest of our actions. Secondly, I saw there was a very nice element of love, compassion, and how that is one that sustains what we try and do and how we drive ourselves forward against this climate emergency as such. And there was the talk about creation care, the idea of coming out of suffering, and also just transitioning, and that transitioning journey we can all go through. And then thirdly, which I think resonates with us all, is the idea of non-harm and how we can push towards the idea of non-harm and as much non-harm as possible. And I think that resonates within all our faiths. So thank you very much. And seeing as you've all stuck to time nicely, I am also going to stick to time, so that's a good thing. And those that might have been on interfaith panels with me before know that I never stick to time. So, we're doing well. We're doing really well. So again, thank you all. So I want to move on to the next part of our discussion, which drives towards more practical elements and practical thoughts of our beliefs and values that must translate into this action. So we've talked a lot about the theory of what we do, but now we want to move towards that practical element. And also, what I want all speakers to do is discuss 3 spiritual practices that shape your relationship towards the climate. So I'll just repeat that because I know it's a bit of a mouthful. So 3 spiritual practices that shape your relationship towards the climate. So the first speaker I am going to call upon is Anthony Lees-Smith, please.
Thanks very much, Rajesh, and hi everyone. Yeah, it's my turn now, taking over from Erica for this bit. I'm going to share a couple of spiritual practices that have particularly helped me, but I'm very conscious that these come from my own Church of England tradition within Christianity, and so other Christians may well approach it in different ways. But the first one is the seasons of the church's year, which often coincide deliberately with changes in the natural seasons. Most people are familiar with Easter and Christmas and harvest, but in many churches, harvest is now part of a whole season called Creation Tide, which ends on the 4th of October, the feast day of St. Francis. During the season of Creation Tide, churches might have a particular focus on the environment, giving thanks for our food, but lamenting also human exploitation and the squandering of the earth's resources, looking for ways perhaps to take action together. And then there's another season as well earlier in the church's year called Lent, the few weeks before Easter. And in fact, tomorrow, you may know, is Pancake Day. And then on Wednesday is the beginning of this year's season of Lent, Ash Wednesday. Lent is traditionally a time of stripping back, a time for self-examination, prayer and fasting, a time for confession and repentance, all before the feast of Easter, when new Christians would traditionally be baptized. So some Christians might give up things like chocolate or alcohol in Lent, but these days Christians are also encouraged to try a carbon fast or have a plastic or meat-free Lent. And this year I've downloaded an app which is going to take me through the 40 days of Lent with 40 of God's creatures. And in our church in Evington, we're going to be getting together each week to do an online study series called Caring for Creation. So using the seasons of the church year, taking the time to examine our relationship with the rest of creation, using those sorts of disciplines, a really helpful way to think about climate change. Another practice which we've done at St. Denis is something called Walks with Wonder. The Bible tells us that Jesus pointed out all sorts of things that we can learn from the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. So as we take a slow walk sort of around the local arboretum, and the person leading shares short verses from the Bible or a prayer, and I find it really helps me to connect with the beauty of creation, experience of that awe and wonder. And someone recently sent me an article suggesting that we won't get people to act on climate change until they learn to love the earth where they live. Pope Francis calls it an ecological conversion that's needed in our hearts and in our communities. And the final thing just to mention is there's a strong Christian tradition of service in action, lament and protest, getting angry about the state of the world, and something that Eric is much better at than I am. But my point is that it's not just about the interior life, as Rajesh said. For me as a Christian, my faith, it has to be lived and embodied in my choices and my actions. You know, I believe that God got his hands dirty when he became flesh in Jesus. So whether it's supporting charities, taking action on climate issues, or getting stuck in with a local tree planting project, I see those things as spiritual practices too that help me to engage with some of these issues.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Again, all I'm going to say is it's such a lovely partnership that I see a father and daughter both together on a platform like this. I have to say that. So yeah, hats off and thank you very much for sharing such lovely thoughts. I'm now going to move on to Davina again, please.
Yeah, thank you. Also, just want to say, Anthony, that was brilliant. Don't know how I'm going to quite follow that, but I'll give it a go. So within Hinduism, our first kind of very practical element is something we call a puja. So this is our worship ritual that we perform. We offer a kind of homage or prayer to our deities, or during our spiritual celebrations and events. And really the word puja means honor, adoring worship. And I think it's really interesting that when we actually do our puja, we offer things such as flowers and water and light. And these are all very natural elements, yet it's essential within our rituals of Hinduism. So I think it's really interesting to think that the gifts that we offer our deities, they're not materialistic gifts, they're that of the earth. And it signifies that within our religion and then subsequently within our culture, we've really thought that the elements should be preserved and they're very important. And I think that really carries through within the rest of our culture and religion. The second practical element is something called ahimsa, which is called non-violence. And interestingly, we have spoke about this previously within most of the faiths actually. But it's really talking about non-harm, non-violence to ourselves, to our planet, and to other people. So it's why actually it's very common within people who align themselves as Hindus that they are vegetarian, because they use the principle of ahimsa to say that they wish no harm upon other animals. And again, that actually ties in very nicely with this whole idea of like veganism or vegetarianism, which is now becoming quite a common trend within the environmental sphere. The third point is yogasan, or more commonly known as yoga in the Western world. And it's definitely very popular, but it's actually an ancient form of meditation. And it actually originated from around 5,000 years ago in India. And the main idea is really finding and connecting with our inner peace. And many of the yoga poses were named after and reflect the moves of animals. And this came when ancient sages in India observed how animals lived in harmony with their environment and their own bodies. And I think it's really interesting because it really recognizes our intimate connection with everything on Earth and it in the universe. So again, I think within Hinduism, everything kind of ties into each other really nicely, and everything is connected like a web. You know, there's always this balance within nature. And I think that ties in really well with the practical side.
Thank you very much, Davina. Again, I think it comes to a point where one of you say you can't inspire, but you just keep following on from the trend, and you certainly do uplift us all in terms of all your speeches and what you're saying. So I think we're all learning from each other on this platform without a doubt. So thank you, Davina. I now want to move on to Rachel Ben. If I can ask you to share your thoughts, please.
Yeah. So the three spiritual practices that that sprang to mind in Judaism are firstly, there is the festival of Tu B'Shvat, which happens near the beginning of the year. It's basically the birthday for the trees. So we're celebrating trees and nature, getting back to, to appreciating the earth and nurturing it. So for instance, synagogues might plant trees to help the environment. I find it problematic that this is also in amongst a culture that promotes animal products, which is responsible for clear cutting a lot of forest, as we know. That's just my sort of personal take on it. There's a commandment, as I might have said before, there's the commandment Tikkun Olam, which is to do with repairing the world. So that, to me, again, my spiritual practices, that again leads me to live a vegan lifestyle, because that is helping the world and recognizing the need to help the planet and to help against the climate crisis. And it's to do with respecting the rights of other animals, which includes preserving and protecting the planet they share with us, and preserving and protecting the home of other humans. And it's actually a commandment in Judaism that says it is a positive commandment that a person live a life derived completely from a tree. So there we are. So that's how I sort of would use Judaism to help climate change.
Thank you, Rachel, for sharing your thoughts on that. Again, I'm here to pick up the key links, and I can already see them emerging through, so it's fantastic. I now want to move on to Dr. Hardip Singh. So if I can ask Dr. Hardip Singh to unmute and share his views.
Thank you. So the first practice is that of Naam Simran. Naam means the name and Simran means to remember. So this is basically a practice that is done on a daily basis for Sikhs. Every day is spiritual. We have no special days. Every day is spiritual. And the baptized Sikhs like myself will get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, to take a shower and then to take an internal shower. And the internal shower is designed so that we can die a death so that we can never die again. And that death is that of the ego. And the ego is ego, edging God out. And that ego manifests as lust, anger, greed, attachment, and pride. Let's face it, our internal climate is in turmoil. The mind is in turmoil. That's why there's external turmoil. So we can't fix the external turmoil without fixing the internal climate turmoil. And meditation is a great way of doing this. It is a way of dissolving yourself and to realize that we are part of a divine ocean. We are oneness, and that everything outside of us affects us, and we affect what's outside of us. Secondly, the practical application of this is that of seva, unconditional service, using one's mind, body, and material resources without any expectation reward. This is manifested as World Sikh Environment Day, which is the 14th of March, which corresponds to the traditional Indian Sikh New Year. And this has motivated Sikhs across the globe to do some environmental work, to plant trees, to plant some flowers, to clean the water in the rivers near your canals. And this has culminated in over the plantation of 150 mini forests in India, using the Miyawaki Japanese methodology, which is a very intense way of planting trees. So they grow very rapidly in a very short space of time and attract a lot of flora and fauna into that particular ecosystem. The third practice is that of rehat. Rehat means personal and corporate code of ethics and conduct by which an initiated Sikh live their life. So for instance, the first rehat is not to eat any meat or fish or eggs. So this is compassionate to animals. We all know that we can solve the world hunger crisis by actually using that grain, not to fatten up the animals to serve our palate, but to feed the hungry across the world. Secondly, Sikhs don't remove any hair from their body because we believe that our natural state should be kept intact. And therefore, this tells me to keep nature intact around me, not to chop down the trees or to destroy the water or the air, but to keep it intact as it was originally created. The third rule is to be faithful to your partner. And therefore, we have to be faithful to our Mother Earth on a constant basis. And lastly, we're told not to take any intoxicants, no alcohol, no recreational drugs in our practices. It's a no-no. And that tells me that I cannot intoxicate the earth. So these are the principles by which I lead my practical existence on this planet and trying to apply it to the earth around me. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Hardeep Singh. Again, uplifting, and you certainly gave us a beautiful insight into some practical tips that we can take away. So thank you. I now want to move on to Amna, please. So Amna, if you'd like to unmute and share your thoughts.
So I struggled to just narrow it down to three. In fact, I go with the three easiest ones. And so the first one is what Muslims can do on a daily basis, which is read the Quran, which is what most people do, especially during prayer. And because the Quran is filled with examples of nature, God brings examples of creatures, for example, just a few, for example, the cow, the ant, the bee. He swears by time, he swears by the sun, by the moon, by the stars, by different types of winds, which shows their importance in our religion. And there are so many verses in the Quran which God describes his beautiful creation in beautiful ways, using imagery and really beautiful poetic expressions. And through these verses, God encourages us to reflect and look at our surroundings. So I chose this one, reading the Quran. So as Muslims, we can read it properly, and not just passively, but read the Quran actively, and do what God says when we're outside. Truly reflect upon his creation and see how we're destroying the world and God's creatures. So that's the first one. The second one, a bit more practical, and what's been mentioned before, something as simple as planting trees. There are many encouragements from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to plant something, and it's seen as an ongoing reward. If I plant something, any creature, no matter how big or small, who benefits from this tree, from this plant, whether it's the shade, whether it's the food from this plant, I will be rewarded for it until even after I die. That reward will still keep coming to me. So planting trees is something else which I thought of. On a third point I thought of was truly following the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His teachings are integral to our religion, and sometimes we can forget the essence of what he taught us. Example being ablution, all Muslims to perform daily prayers have to perform ablution, which itself is an act of devotion and worship. And ablution involves washing your face, your hands, your feet, and passing wet hands over your hair. But through this process, you can very easily waste a lot of water. But if we go back to his actual practice, he was very, very strict on how much water you should use. And he used to use like a particular kind of jug, which equates to around 500 ml, and give or take 500 ml, which is a very little amount of water, really, if you're washing your hands and your face and arms 3 times. So really to go back to his true practice of not being wasteful. And he mentions as well that when you're doing ablution, do not be wasteful, even if you were by a running river. So yes, number 1, reading the Quran actively. Number 2, planting trees. And number 3, doing ablution or wudu in the proper manner which we're taught to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amna, and I really appreciate you summarising and bringing it together for us at the end as well. Certainly makes it easier for me, which is always a good thing. Our last speaker, and again, who wonderfully does my job for me, Edith. If I can call upon you next to share your thoughts.
I'll try it again unmuted. Okay, so I'm just trying to put on a little timer here. I'm going to go back to mindfulness. It's already been mentioned that our internal climate and the external climate cause either calm and peace and well-being or turbulence. Mindfulness is one of the ways in which we look after both of these aspects of our lives. Thich Nhat Hanh has taken what are traditionally the 5 Buddhist precepts and turned them into 5 mindfulness trainings. It is recommended that we recite these trainings at least once a month, but more often than that if we can manage. And this is a daily practice. As others have said, there is no special day. In fact, for us, there is no special moment. It is every moment. Mindfulness is being fully present in every single moment. So I have chosen to look at consumption because overconsumption is one of the things that drives our difficulties in climate change. And to look at our internal climate, we begin there. So one of the 5 mindfulness trainings begins in this way. I apologize for looking down, I'm going to read it. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate interbeing and consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, in the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society, and the earth. Another one tells us about our reverence for life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. Of course, one of the ways that we cannot avoid consuming is by eating. Veganism has been mentioned. Veganism is also recommended in our tradition. And in fact, Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us that eating in itself can be a very deep practice. We do it repeatedly, so it is an opportunity for us to pause and reflect. He reminds us that every morsel of food is an ambassador from the cosmos. So we have verses to recite before every meal, and I'll read 2 of these. May we recognize and transform our unwholesome mental formations, especially our greed, and learn to eat with moderation. And the second one, which is very explicit in light of our current discussion, may we keep our compassion alive by living and eating in such a way that we reduce the suffering of living beings, stop contributing to climate change, and heal and preserve our precious planet. So in this way, as a daily practice, we connect to our understanding of interbeing, and we bring our mindfulness to the way we live, and with particularly the way we consume.
Thank you so much, Edith, for that. You once again so beautifully put your points across there, and certainly taught me something. And you all have certainly, I'm sure we've taught each other a real message here today. But again, and I'm going to feel sorry for myself here and say I've got the tough job in summarizing everything, because I seriously cannot do justice to all the conversation, and I would love to have more dialogue with you, but maybe some other time. But I will say again, and I'm going to try and put this into three jars, as you may say. And the first one being meditation and prayer is, I think, came across from all your conversations, that prayer is arguably the seed that once planted helps to flourish one's mindset into that righteous mind and that righteous sense of thinking. So internalizing that practice is what I heard from a lot of you. And then lifestyle changes, simply appreciating nature, and going for a walk, looking at nature, being one with nature, being one with creation, again, is what I heard. The ideas of ritualistic practices that exist within your faith that have been practiced years and years ago in other eras. And then also the idea of reflection was something that I think also came up from all of you. Erica, Edith, sorry, I'm going to touch on yours when you said mindfulness as a sense of reflection. And then I think there was so many references to reflecting, and arguably reflecting coincides with the idea of meditation and prayer as well. So really, I say a heartfelt thank you to you all, because you've certainly taught me a lot, and I think none of you have gone over time except me. So, talk about putting it into practice. I just want to make sure this is a time, we've got a chat function, and if you can all just drop your questions into that chat function, and we will definitely take them at the end. I now want to swiftly move on to, just before we go into the Q&As, I want you to tell us what one thought you'd like all the attendees to take away. So that one pertinent thought that you'd want everyone to take away. So arguably just one takeaway. So if I can ask Dr. Hardeep Singh to go first again and take us through his one takeaway.
So I would say let's make the transition from an egocentric to an eco-centric world. Thank you.
Wow, beautiful. What a way to start. Can I move on to Rachel Ben next, please?
Yeah, my takeaway, I have a couple of takeaways. Can I say them both? Or just one?
No, go ahead. Say two.
So the first one is to appreciate nature and the beauty of the planet, because of the beauty it offers and the home it provides. In fact, Judaism has blessings for seeing things like lofty mountains, seeing a rainbow, and this obliges us to, and makes it a pleasure to observe and respect nature. Of course, if climate change is very, if we don't act against climate change, none of this exists, either for us or for the homes of other animals. And my second takeaway is to do everything in our power to protect the planet for ourselves and for other non-humans.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Again, certainly following on from Dr. Hardeep's footsteps there. So thank you. I would like to now call upon Amna.
I've got two takeaways as well. The first one being Ramadan is less than 2 months away, and normally it's like a training month for Muslims. So as well as abstaining from food and drink during the day, people give up bad habits like smoking, etc. So why don't we make this Ramadan something a bit more special? Either give up plastic for the month, or reduce your plastic, or not gorge on meat when you're breaking your fast, or perhaps use less water, or do something different this Ramadan. So make it truly spiritual, and that, of course, will lead to reward and pleasure, the pleasure of God. And secondly, thinking about the future of mosques. For those of you who might not be aware, I think last year there was a mosque opened in Cambridge, which is Europe's first eco-mosque. A truly amazing feat. So please do Google it in your spare time, and how we can kind of model our mosques in Leicester. There are over 70 on the Cambridge Mosque, and how we can make them eco-mosques. So build, bee-friendly gardens, have water-saving taps, work with other faith organisations to bring about local change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amna. Really appreciate you giving them 2 takeaways. I now want to move on to Anthony Lee Smith, and you can certainly give 2 if you want, both of you.
Thank you. Well, we might do. We'll see. I want to offer give you a picture, actually, rather than necessarily a word. Right at the end of the Christian Bible is this beautiful picture of the new creation, which is like a garden city, a city with trees and rivers and fruit and leaves in the middle of the streets, a place full of life and diversity. But it isn't new in the sense of the old one's been thrown out. At least that's how I understand it, the old one being thrown out and a whole kind of brand new one. This is renewed. And I certainly want us all to kind of be encouraged to think about where God's Spirit is already at work in the world, and where we can kind of join in with what's already going on in that work of renewal, even where that, and especially I think Erica would say, where that means challenging not just ourselves but bigger systems that need to change.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Again, I love the analogy of a picture and you taking us through that visual. Thank you. So now, next, I want to move on to Davina, please.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rajesh. So I think we've heard a lot about kind of hope and compassion and challenging the system, which I completely agree with. But I'd say my key takeaway is actually just reflecting on today and thinking about the idea of collaboration. If we look at what we've achieved today, so many people from so many different faiths all coming together, all collectively agreeing about how we need to mitigate climate change. If we can put this then into action and collaborate together within Leicester, within Leicestershire, and then, as even wider than that, than the UK and in the world, I think it's a really promising hope that people working together can achieve greatness. And I think that's what I definitely take from today.
Thank you, Davina. Again, I can see such similarity in all the conversation that's gone on with our takeaways as well, and that shows a shift from us being static as just one to dynamic together. So I think it's fantastic. And finally, Edith, you get it's on you to say the signing off of your takeaway. So no pressure at all.
I was going to say no pressure then. Well, I'm going to come in with that. Well, not my words. I'm going to come back to the Zen master's wise words again. And I offer these because governments and so many organizations actually give us dates in the future, don't they? By 20 something. And what is offered is so little. So I'm going to come back to mindfulness, and I'll offer you Thich Nhat Hanh's words again. And it's this. He says, the present is the substance from which the future is made. It is now. It has to be now. The present is the substance from which the future is made. I offer you that.
Wow, beautiful, Edith. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. You're going to be glad that I'm not going to attempt to even summarize what you guys just said then, because that was just a whirlwind of such beautiful thoughts, and I'm sure you guys took what you needed to take away from them. But I want to say a massive thank you to you all. Now, before we close, I am going to go to my chat facility and just shout out some questions we've got, and then we can do a quick whiz through and see your thoughts. So one question has come in, which is, do you have any examples of what your local faith communities have been doing to practically engage your members in climate action? So, for example, are there any projects that have been done by your faith group? So, is there anything practical? I'm going to go by who I can see first on my screen. Dr. Hardip Singh, can you share anything that in terms of the practicality of any projects that have been going on?
Yes, so we've actually achieved one of the Gurdwara Sikh temples has gone plastic free in the local area, and that was led by the children. And that was covered by BBC News Round by Mim Kaur, who's a journalist. I can send you the link, Rajesh. You can have a look at that, and you can send it on to your local, your group as well. Secondly, we've been planting lots of trees in the last 7 years. The last year was the 550th anniversary of Guru Nanak's birth anniversary, and around the world we had the 1 million tree plantation to plant 550 trees at 1,820 locations, which multiplied up makes 1 million trees. So we planted 550 trees in the National Youth Forest in Mead, Derbyshire, as a congregation, which is great. And every year on the 14th of March, at the local Sikh temple here, we ask the congregation to plant bulbs in a biodegradable pot to take home with them, and to plant those in their back garden to get them green-fingered.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hardip Singh. I would like to move on to Anthony Lee Smith. Any thoughts in terms of projects?
Yeah, I noticed somebody's actually also already mentioned in the chat about the Eco Church program. So the Eco Church program, individual churches can become can gain an Eco Church award, and it just encourages local congregations to think about some of these issues around worship and teaching, about how they use their buildings and land, obviously reducing carbon footprint, changing their lifestyle, and engaging with other people in the community as well to work on projects together, which is something that here in Evington we've really tried hard to do. So we were involved with Amina and others on an interfaith footpaths course last year, and we're looking at developing a community garden as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Anthony. We are very short on time. I do want to still hear the rest of you. So very quickly, if I can go to Davina, please.
Yep, of course. So just quickly, we've had a lot of interest from young people within our community. So we've done quite a big project working with university students, trying to encourage them to make small sustainable changes. So encouraging them to, say, make vegan meals, use Ecosia as a web browser instead of using Google. And Ecosia, for those who don't know, is a web browser that donates a significant amount of its profit to planting trees across the world. Similar to kind of the Eco Mosque, Eco Church, we also have an upcoming project, once COVID friendly, to start ensuring that our mandirs, our temples, are also transforming the way that they use plastic, use their water consumption, grow their own food. So that's another project that we're currently working on.
Thank you so much, Davina. That's amazing. Some lovely projects that are coming out of this, and I'm sure it's gonna see a lot of collaboration going on in the future. So brilliant to hear. Amna, can we hear your thoughts? I think you did touch upon some, but if you can just share some more.
Yes, the Muslim Council of Britain do have campaigns, and I think they're going to do a lot more like this in the future. There have been campaigns to get mosques all litter picking on the same day, and imams to include climate change within their sermons. Also within Sunday schools, which happen at mosques, but it's everyday school really, children are taught more about climate change and how to interact with the environment as well. But there's still a lot of work to be done still. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amna. Really appreciate it. And Rachel, Ben, any projects on your end?
Yeah, so in our synagogue, we've started using only eco-friendly products in the synagogue. So, for instance, hand washes, washing up liquids, things like that. We've also reduced our, I think we've reduced our plastic usage as well. Around, as I've mentioned before, the festival of Tu B'Shvat, around Tu B'Shvat, we tend to do what's called a Tu B'Shvat Seder, which is basically like a service that is usually around raising awareness about climate change through discussion, through both, the sort of the rabbi delivering it and also discussing amongst ourselves what we can do. We have what's called a green kiddush. A kiddush is basically like a shared meal. So we'll have eco-friendly foods at that meal. And finally, there's a nationwide organization called XR Jews, which is basically Jews who are in XR coming together to fight the climate through using the religious teachings.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you. And finally, Edith, any projects or events going on your side?
Only in the sense of mindfulness. We do run regular days of mindfulness, and we want to promote that. Obviously, as I've outlined with a view to mindful consumption, that we see this as one of the things which, if we are, if our inner turbulence is disturbing us, we will, even though we have good intentions, we will tend to overconsume. So that is one of the main things we do. Nationally, we are involved with things like tree planting, and also in some areas of the country, forest schools, encouraging that engagement and with the environment, with youngsters. Obviously not in times of COVID at the moment. But no, locally, we are very, very small. I mean, there's only half a dozen of us. So we're doing our best.
Thank you. Thank you, Edith. Thank you so much. And when you mentioned that, I'd just like to say one thing to you all, that we may all be small in our own way, but we're very large together. And I think that shows here today that our values are aligned, our vision is aligned, and we're all engaged in the same cause. And that too, I'd like to say, not through a different lens. I think we all have a very similar lens. And what better platform to sit on today and just talk about them different dynamic lenses that we all see through, and we're all driving towards the same. So it'd be great if you all interconnect and collaborate together. I think we've got a very bright future. I would also like to say I would love to take some of the other questions in chat, but I am not, so you're going to be, it's okay, you're relieved, don't worry. I would say, and Zena, if this is possible, if we can extract any questions, and hopefully then we can direct them towards you, and it'd be nice if you can send us some of your questions back in a written format. Maybe that might be a thought. There's a really good question in the chat from Neil, I believe, but apologies, we can't take them all, but that just means we'll come back again at some point. So, it's always good, there's something to come back to. I am going to close by saying a couple of things, and that is a massive thank you to you all for investing your evening by sitting on this panel, by discussing your thoughts, and not just your views from scripture, your views from various different philosophies that have allowed me to see how they interconnect so much and they come together. And I hope that's allowed you to see that too. It's allowed our viewers to see that actually, yes, we may belong to a faith, belong to a belief background, but actually we are all one. So it was absolutely fantastic to hear that. So as the group Climate Action, we are hoping that there's various things that will come out of today and this 3-day event, Climate and Me. And it might require you guys to write letters to your MPs, talking to other people about climate change, changing some of the way in which you live. Now, you've talked about some fantastic ways in which you guys can make them practical changes. And I'm sure you can empower others to do that too. So I look forward to hopefully speaking to a lot more of you in the future. And Climate Action have also set up a pledge system and a web page with supporting information with loads of ideas of the kind of things you want to do, the information about how, why, what you'd be willing to do. And I really hope that you'd be inspired to look at that and maybe make a pledge. And that's not just going to help Climate Action as a group, it's going to help us all, because if we can make a pledge as one, we can really make a difference. So please do look at the chat function, and that will be dropped into there. And our organisation as a whole, so myself, I'm from Hindu Climate Action. And what we look to do is educate, engage, and empower others to act. In essence, we look for that wholesome approach, that wholesome ideology of bringing people together. I also want to take this time to point people in the direction of our website and our webpage. We have loads of resources on there. If you want to reach out to us, if you want to connect to us, if you do want to connect to myself and speak to me more, I'm always up for a conversation around climate. I think you've got that, and I think you know that already. And yeah, follow us on social media. We've got some fantastic things. It'd be lovely to collaborate with a lot of you, I think, and hopefully do more events like this in collaboration. And sadly, time has flown. And guess what? We're bang on time. We've done really, really well. I have to say, maybe a minute over, but that doesn't matter. That's me. I want to say a massive thanks to you all. I want to say a massive thanks to Zena and her team, and how much help she's supported and what she's done. Allowed me to be a host. Allowed me this opportunity to speak to such wonderful people. And I'm sure, for sure, we'll meet again. And just to let you know, do join the rest of Climate and Me workshops. The talk and closing concert is tomorrow. So please continue to join, as it will draw to a close tomorrow with a concert that I'm sure all of you will enjoy. So on that note, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. So yes, good night and take care all.
Thank you.